Hello, and welcome back to Her True Stories, our community of strong, empowered women. I'm so excited to share today's story with you. It's a powerful tale of divine justice, community strength, and what happens when someone underestimates a woman of faith. This is Divine Retribution, the fall of Brandon Vance, and I promise you, it's going to leave you feeling inspired and reminded of your own incredible power. Before we dive in, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It helps us reach more women who need to hear these stories of triumph. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with a woman in your life who needs to be reminded of her strength. Now, let's get into this incredible journey of justice and redemption. They say God doesn't like ugly, and sometimes divine intervention needs a little push. He thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn that some battles are fought on a spiritual plane, with a determined widow as the earthly vessel. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the mahogany dining table as I served what would be the last meal I'd ever prepare in this house. 23 years of marriage, and it all came down to this moment. My husband Richard's memorial dinner, barely 2 weeks after we'd laid him to rest. "Pass the gravy, Evelyn," Brandon said, not even looking up from his plate. At 28, my stepson had always been entitled, but grief had stripped away any pretense of respect he might have once shown me. I handed him the silver gravy boat, the one from our wedding china set, the one Richard had insisted we use for special occasions. How fitting that it would be present for this special occasion, too. "You know, Evelyn," Brandon said, cutting into his steak with unnecessary force, "I've been thinking about the future of this place." My stomach clenched. "Here it comes. Dad's gone now, and let's be honest, you don't really belong here anymore." He finally looked up, his pale blue eyes cold and calculating. "You never gave him children anyway. What's the point of you staying?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Richard and I had tried for years to have children. The miscarriages, the failed treatments, the quiet grief we'd shared. None of that mattered to Brandon. In his mind, I was just an obstacle between him and his inheritance. "This is my home, Brandon," I said quietly, setting down my fork. "Your father and I built this life together." He laughed, actually laughed, and took a long sip of the wine I'd poured from Richard's best bottle. "Built what? A marriage without an heir? Face it, Evelyn. Now that Dad is dead, mourn and pack your bags and never come back. You never gave him children anyway." He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "You don't have anything here anyway." The dining room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I stared at this young man who'd eaten at my table for over 2 decades, who I'd helped with homework, who I'd cheered for at football games, who I'd loved as my own son despite his mother's poison dripping from his lips whenever Richard wasn't around. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the storm building inside me. "I'm glad you understand. I'll give you a week to get your things together. That's more than generous, considering you have no legal claim to any of this." He gestured around the room with his wine glass. "Dad may have been sentimental, but I'm practical. This house, the business, the investments, it's all mine now." I stood slowly, my hands trembling slightly as I smoothed my black dress. "If you'll excuse me, I think I'll retire early." "Good idea. You'll need your rest for packing." I walked to the staircase, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Halfway up, I turned back. Brandon was already on his phone, probably calling his girlfriend Sarah to share the good news about his inheritance windfall. "Brandon," I called softly. He looked up annoyed. "What?" "Your father loved you more than life itself. He would be ashamed of the man you've become." His face darkened. "Just pack your bags, Evelyn. I won't ask again." I went to my bedroom, the master suite I'd shared with Richard for over 2 decades, and quietly began moving my belongings. Not because I was giving up, but because I was preparing for war. And in war, sometimes a strategic retreat is necessary before the real battle begins. By morning, I was gone. I left no forwarding address, no note, no trace of the woman who had made that house a home. I simply vanished, taking with me only my personal belongings and something Brandon had no idea existed. A complete understanding of every aspect of his father's business empire, every contact, every weakness, every secret that could be used against him. He thought he'd won. He had no idea the game was just beginning. The law offices of Morrison, Patterson and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of the tallest building in downtown Atlanta. I'd been here many times with Richard for estate planning, but never alone. Never as a widow fighting for her life. "Mrs. Vance, I'm so sorry for your loss," said Janet Morrison, Richard's longtime attorney, as she led me into her corner office. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city sprawling below us, a city where Richard had built his empire, where Brandon now thought he ruled. "Thank you, Janet. Though I suspect after today, I may need to go back to my maiden name." Janet's eyebrows rose. She was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and eyes that had seen every kind of human greed and deception. "Why don't you tell me what happened?" I recounted the dinner, Brandon's words, his assumption that I had no legal claim to anything. Janet listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each detail. That arrogant little... She caught herself. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance. But Brandon is about to learn a very expensive lesson about assumptions." She pulled out a thick folder. "Your husband updated his will 6 months before he died. He was very specific about his wishes, particularly regarding Brandon's inheritance being conditional on his character." My heart hammered as she opened the folder. "What does it say?" "Richard left Brandon the family business, Vance Industries, and a generous trust fund, but only if he treats you with complete respect. If he violates that condition, the business gets sold and the proceeds go to charity. Everything else, the house, the investment portfolio, the art collection, the vacation properties, goes to you regardless." "What condition?" "Brandon must treat you with the respect due to his father's widow. Richard was very specific about this. Any attempt to force you from the family home or to treat you with anything less than complete respect would result in his inheritance being modified." I felt the first spark of something I hadn't felt since Richard died. Hope. "Modified how?" Janet smiled, and for the first time, I saw the steel beneath her polished exterior. "If Brandon violates the respect clause, his inheritance gets reduced to a small trust fund, enough to live on, but nothing like the empire he's expecting. The business would be sold, and the proceeds would go to various charities Richard supported, with you as the executor. He forced me out of the house yesterday. Then he's already in violation." Janet leaned forward. "Mrs. Vance, your husband was a smart man. He knew his son's character better than Brandon realized. He told me once that he hoped Brandon would grow up after his death, but if he didn't..." She shrugged. "Well, Richard believed in consequences. What do we do now? We document everything. The dinner conversation, his demands, your forced departure. Do you have any witnesses?" I shook my head. "Just the 2 of us." "That's all right. We'll work with what we have. In the meantime, Brandon needs to be formally notified of the will's contents. He's been avoiding my calls since your husband's funeral." As Janet explained the legal process, I found myself studying her more closely. There was something familiar about her calm strength, the way she spoke about justice with such conviction. "Janet, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Are you a woman of faith?" Her smile was warm and genuine. "I am. Third Baptist Church, been a member for 15 years. Why do you ask?" "I attend Grace Methodist. I've been praying for guidance about how to handle this situation." I believe Richard's will is an answer to those prayers. I believe in prayer too, Mrs. Vance. And sometimes God uses the law as his instrument. She stood and walked to her window, gazing out at the city. Your stepson thinks he can bully you because you're a woman alone. He doesn't understand that you're never alone when you have faith. What do you mean? She turned back to me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my pulse quicken. The legal battle is just the beginning. Men like Brandon, they don't just respect court orders. They respect power, social power, economic power, the kind of power that comes from being connected to the right people. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that God works through his people, Mrs. Vance. And sometimes his people need to work together to ensure justice is served. She returned to her desk and pulled out a leather address book. There are women in this city, women of faith, women of influence, who don't appreciate seeing widows mistreated, women who believe in taking care of their own. I felt a chill run down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. Tell me more. First, we handle this legally. We serve Brandon with the will. We document his violations. We protect your interests in court. But while we're doing that, she smiled again, and this time, it reminded me of a lioness protecting her cubs. While we're doing that, we also pray, and we talk to the right people, and we let the community know what kind of man Richard Vance's son really is. That sounds like a plan. It is. And Mrs. Vance? Brandon has no idea what he's unleashed. He thinks he's fighting a grieving widow. He's actually fighting the entire network of women who've built the power structure in this city. Women who take care of each other. As I left her office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The thrill of being truly understood by another person. Janet Morrison wasn't just my lawyer. She was my partner in something bigger than a legal battle. She was my partner in divine retribution. That evening, I knelt beside my bed in my hotel room and prayed. Not for forgiveness or mercy, but for the strength to be God's instrument of justice. Some battles, I realized, are meant to be fought not with anger, but with righteousness. And Brandon was about to learn the difference. The emergency prayer meeting convened at Janet Morrison's penthouse apartment on a rainy Thursday evening. I'd been in the city for 3 days, staying at the Ritz-Carlton while Brandon celebrated his premature victory in my former home. But tonight, the real work began. Ladies, Janet said, addressing the circle of 12 women gathered in her living room, we have a situation that requires our attention. I recognized some faces from various charity events and church functions over the years, but others were strangers. What united them wasn't just faith, it was power. These were wives of judges, bank presidents, city council members, and corporate executives. These were the women who ran the boards of every major charity, who organized the social events that determined who was in and who was out, who could make or break reputations with a single phone call. Before we begin, said Margaret Sterling, wife of the city's most prominent federal judge, I want to make something clear. We're not here to gossip or scheme. We're here to pray for justice and to ensure that God's will is carried out in this situation. Amen, murmured the others. Janet nodded toward me. Evelyn, would you share your story? I told them everything. The dinner, Brandon's cruelty, his assumption that I had no rights, his demand that I leave the only home I'd known for over 20 years. As I spoke, I watched their faces change from polite interest to genuine anger. Disgraceful, whispered Patricia Whitmore, whose husband owned the largest construction company in the state. Absolutely disgraceful. What kind of man treats his father's widow like hired help? Asked Victoria Chin, whose family controlled 3 major banks in the city. The kind of man who needs to learn some hard lessons, said Margaret Sterling quietly. Continue, Evelyn. I finished with Janet's discovery of the will and Brandon's clear violation of the respect clause. The legal battle will take months, possibly years. But Janet suggested that sometimes justice requires community involvement. Prayer, Janet clarified quickly, and the natural consequences that come when a community learns about someone's true character. Margaret Sterling nodded slowly. Ladies, we've dealt with situations like this before. Remember when Thomas Bradshaw tried to cheat his elderly mother out of her home? Or when Michael Patterson started that rumor about his business partner's wife? Both learned their lessons, said Victoria with a slight smile, without anyone having to do anything unethical or illegal. Exactly, said Janet. We simply pray for justice and let our communities know what kind of man we're dealing with. The consequences are natural. People don't want to associate with bullies and cowards. I felt a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation. What exactly does that mean? Patricia Whitmore leaned forward. It means, dear, that Brandon is about to discover that his father's reputation was the only thing protecting him from the consequences of his own character. My husband is on the board of 3 country clubs, said Victoria. Brandon applied for membership at 2 of them last month, probably planning to celebrate his inheritance. I imagine those applications will face some unexpected complications. And my husband's construction company was bidding on a major project with Vance Industries, added Patricia. I suspect he might have concerns about doing business with someone who mistreats widows. Ladies, Margaret Sterling said gently, remember, we're not orchestrating anything. We're simply sharing information about someone's character and letting others make their own decisions. Of course, said Janet. We're women of faith. We believe in truth and consequences. The meeting continued for another hour, but it wasn't the scheming session I'd expected. Instead, it was a prayer circle, women praying for justice, for wisdom, for the strength to stand up to bullies. But underneath the prayers, I sensed something else, a network of influence that had been built over decades, one relationship at a time. As the other women began to leave, Margaret Sterling approached me. Evelyn, I want you to know that what happened to you makes me sick. I've seen too many women abandoned after their husbands die, treated like they never mattered. Thank you, Margaret. That means more than you know. I also want you to know that we don't take pleasure in what's going to happen to Brandon. But some men only learn when they face real consequences for their actions. What do you think will happen? She smiled sadly. Men like Brandon derive their power from connections, from being part of the club. When the club starts to question his character, she shrugged. Well, let's just say isolation is a powerful teacher. After everyone left, Janet and I sat in her living room, looking out at the city lights. I've never been part of anything like this, I admitted. Neither had I until about 10 years ago. I was representing a woman whose husband had died, and his business partners were trying to steal her inheritance. Margaret Sterling's husband was one of the judges in the case. What happened? The judge ruled fairly, but the business partners were well connected. They thought they could pressure other judges, intimidate my client, make her life miserable until she gave up. Janet sipped her wine. That's when I learned about the network. This group has been meeting for 10 years. In various forms. We're not some secret society, Evelyn. We're just women who believe in taking care of each other. Women who've learned that sometimes the system only works when good people make it work. And it's always worked? Every time. Because we're not trying to destroy anyone, we're just ensuring that actions have consequences. When someone mistreats a widow, or cheats an elderly person, or abuses their position of power, they need to face the natural results of their choices. That night, I prayed differently than I had in years. I prayed for the strength to see this through, for the wisdom to let justice run its course, and for the faith to believe that sometimes God uses his people to carry out his will. Brandon thought he'd won by intimidating one woman. He had no idea he'd just declared war on an entire network of women who'd spent decades building the power structure that kept this city running. The battle was about to begin, and he was already surrounded. 2 weeks after the prayer meeting, I was having lunch at the Metropolitan Club when I saw Brandon for the first time since leaving the house. He was across the dining room, trying to get the attention of Harrison Wells, the president of First National Bank. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in Brandon's shoulders, the forced smile on his face. Harrison was politely nodding, but his body language screamed discomfort. After less than 5 minutes, Harrison excused himself and walked away, leaving Brandon sitting alone at his table. Evelyn. I turned to find Victoria Chin approaching my table. She was impeccably dressed in a navy suit, her expression warm but her eyes sharp. Victoria, what a lovely surprise. Please join me. She sat down and glanced toward Brandon's table. I see young Mr. Vance is having lunch alone today. It appears so. She picked up her napkin and smoothed it across her lap. You know, my husband mentioned something interesting yesterday. Apparently, Brandon has been trying to schedule a meeting with him about expanding his business credit line. Oh, yes. But Daniel has been surprisingly busy lately. Booked solid for the next 6 months, apparently. Victoria's smile was subtle but unmistakable. It's amazing how quickly a banker's schedule can fill up when concerns arise about a client's character. I felt a flutter of something dark and satisfying in my chest. Concerns? Well, word gets around in our community. When someone treats a widow with such disrespect, it makes people wonder what other ethical corners they might cut. She sipped her water. Daniel takes character very seriously when it comes to business partnerships. Across the room, Brandon was now on his phone, his free hand running through his hair in frustration. Whatever conversation he was having wasn't going well. Victoria, may I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever feel guilty about this? She was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. Evelyn, my grandmother came to this country with nothing. She worked in a factory, saved every penny, and eventually opened a small restaurant. When she was 65, her business partner, a man she'd trusted for 20 years, tried to steal the restaurant from her by claiming she was too old to run it. What happened? The women in her church, Chinese immigrants like her, they took care of it. Not through lawyers or courts, but through community. They stopped eating at businesses that supported him. They stopped recommending his services. They made sure everyone knew what kind of man he was. Victoria's eyes were steady. Within 6 months, he was bankrupt. And my grandmother ran her restaurant until she was 82. So this is about justice? It's about consequences. Men like Brandon believe they can treat women as disposable because they think we're powerless. But we're not powerless. We're just quiet about our power. As if summoned by our conversation, Brandon suddenly appeared at our table. Up close, I could see the strain around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. Hello, Evelyn, he said, his voice tight. I've been looking for you. Brandon, how are you settling into the house? We need to talk. There are some complications with Dad's will. I glanced at Victoria, who was watching the interaction with barely concealed interest. What kind of complications? Legal ones. Janet Morrison seems to think you have some claim to the estate, but we both know that's ridiculous. Do we?
His jaw tightened.
Look, I was upset at dinner that night. Maybe I said some things I shouldn't have. But that doesn't change the reality of the situation. And what reality is that? That you're not my real mother. That you don't have children to inherit anything. That Dad couldn't have intended for you to keep everything while his actual son gets nothing. Victoria cleared her throat softly. I'm sorry, but did you just say you want to take inheritance away from your stepmother because she couldn't have children? Brandon's face flushed. This is a private family matter. Of course it is. I was just leaving anyway. Victoria stood and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Evelyn, I'll call you later about the charity luncheon. There are several people who are very interested in meeting you. After she left, Brandon slumped into her chair. Evelyn, I need you to work with me here. Some weird things are happening. What kind of weird things? Business things. The country club membership I applied for got rejected. They said there were character concerns, but wouldn't elaborate. 3 major clients have suddenly decided not to renew their contracts. And the bank. He rubbed his temples. The bank is reviewing our credit line. I felt that dark satisfaction growing stronger. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Because Janet Morrison seems to think you have some nuclear option in Dad's will. Something about a respect clause that could cost me everything. Your father was a thorough man. Evelyn, please. I know I was an ass that night, but I'm Dad's son. He wouldn't have wanted his business destroyed over a family argument. Are you asking me to help you? I'm asking you to be reasonable. We can share the estate. You can keep the house and I'll keep the business. But this legal warfare isn't good for anyone. I studied his face, seeing the boy I'd once loved beneath the desperate man before me. For just a moment, I considered mercy. Then I remembered his words, "Pack your bags and never come back." You never gave him children anyway. Brandon, I think you should speak with your own attorney about the will. As for the business problems you're having. I stood and gathered my purse. Well, I imagine those are just natural consequences of your choices. What does that mean? It means that actions have consequences. And sometimes those consequences take time to manifest. I left him sitting there, staring after me with a mixture of confusion and growing fear. As I walked through the club's elegant lobby, I noticed several people I recognized: board members, business leaders, social influencers. Some nodded politely, others looked away. But all of them had heard about Brandon Vance and the widow he'd thrown out of her home. The network was working, quietly and efficiently. And Brandon was just beginning to understand that he'd made a terrible mistake. The phone call came at 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I was in my hotel room, reading the morning paper and drinking coffee, when Janet called with news that made my heart sing. Evelyn, you need to hear this. Brandon's attorney just called me, practically begging for a meeting. What kind of meeting? The kind where his client realizes he's screwed and wants to negotiate. Janet's voice was bright with satisfaction. Apparently, Brandon's having what his lawyer delicately called business difficulties. I set down my coffee cup.
Tell me.
Where do I start? Morrison Construction canceled their contract with Vance Industries yesterday, cited philosophical differences about family values. The Highland Country Club formally rejected Brandon's membership application. And get this, the Atlanta Business Journal is running a story tomorrow about ethical leadership in family businesses. What does that mean? It means someone gave them a very detailed account of how Brandon treated his father's widow. No names mentioned, of course, but anyone who knows the family will recognize the story. I felt a chill of excitement. Who would have spoken to the press? I have no idea, Janet said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. But I imagine it was someone who believes that the public has a right to know about the character of people they might do business with. What does Brandon's lawyer want? To discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to the estate dispute. He's claiming that Brandon was under emotional stress when he made his demands and that he deeply regrets any disrespect toward you. Too little, too late. That's what I told him. But Evelyn, this is just the beginning. Margaret Sterling called me yesterday. Her husband is hearing rumors that the State Ethics Commission is looking into some of Brandon's business practices. Nothing criminal, mind you, but enough to make investors nervous. What kind of business practices? Inflated billing, corners cut on safety inspections, that sort of thing. The kind of stuff that gets overlooked when you're connected, but becomes a problem when people start asking questions. And people are asking questions? Honey, people are asking questions because they're concerned about associating with someone who mistreats widows. Once you start looking into someone's character, you tend to find all sorts of interesting things. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk through downtown Atlanta. I needed to see the city with fresh eyes, to understand how the network was affecting Brandon's world. My first stop was the offices of Vance Industries. The building looked the same from the outside, but when I walked into the lobby, I sensed something different. The receptionist, a young woman named Kelly whom I'd known for years, looked up with surprise. "Mrs. Vance, I didn't expect to see you here." "Just passing by, Kelly. How are things?" She glanced around nervously. "Well, to be honest, it's been a little tense lately. Mr. Brandon seems stressed about something. And we've had several clients cancel their contracts recently." "I'm sorry to hear that. It's just strange, you know? Everything was fine when Mr. Richard was alive, but now." She shrugged. "I probably shouldn't be talking about this." "Of course not. You take care of yourself, Kelly." As I left the building, I noticed a man in a suit waiting by the elevator. He looked familiar, one of the reporters from the Atlanta Business Journal. Apparently, the story about ethical leadership was getting more attention than expected. My next stop was the Highland Country Club, where Brandon had been rejected for membership. The valet recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Vance."
How lovely to see you.
"I was so sorry to hear about Mr. Richard." "Thank you, James. That's very kind. Are you here for lunch? I can call ahead to the dining room." "Actually, I was wondering if you'd heard anything about Brandon's membership application." James looked uncomfortable. "Well, I probably shouldn't say anything, but there was some discussion among the board members. Questions about character and family values." "I see. Between you and me, Mrs. Vance, the way some people treat family after a death, it doesn't sit well with folks here. We're old-fashioned about respect and dignity." "I appreciate that, James. Of course, if you are interested in membership yourself, I'm sure the board would be very welcoming. You've always been a lady of class." As I walked through the club's elegant halls, I marveled at how quickly word had spread. The network wasn't just a group of wealthy women. It was a web of relationships that touched every level of society. Valets, receptionists, waiters, shop owners. They all talked, they all shared information, and they all had opinions about right and wrong. That evening, I met Janet for dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. She was practically glowing with excitement. "Evelyn, you won't believe what happened today. Brandon showed up at my office without an appointment, demanding to speak with me." "What did he want?" "He wanted to know what you were doing to him. He was convinced you were orchestrating some kind of campaign against him." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that you were a woman of faith who believed in justice, and that sometimes justice comes through community consequences rather than legal ones." "How did he react?" "He was furious. Started ranting about how he was being persecuted for one bad conversation. Said it wasn't fair that his entire life was being destroyed over a family argument." "Did you explain the will to him?" "I tried to. But he's so focused on what he sees as persecution that he can't understand that this is about consequences. He thought he could bully you into giving up your rights, and now he's shocked that the community is responding to his behavior." "What happens next?" Janet smiled. "Next, we let the process continue. The legal battle will take months, but the social consequences are already happening. And Evelyn, this is just the beginning." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Brandon has spent his entire life coasting on his father's reputation. Now people are seeing who he really is without that protection, and they don't like what they see." As we ate dinner, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of seeing justice served. Not through anger or revenge, but through the simple process of truth being revealed and consequences being applied. Brandon had thought he was untouchable because he was Richard Vance's son. But he was learning that respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And some lessons can only be learned through complete isolation from the community that once protected you. The network was working perfectly, and Brandon was beginning to understand that he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. 3 weeks after the Business Journal article, I was shopping at Lenox Square when I saw Sarah, Brandon's girlfriend, sitting alone in the food court. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect makeup slightly smudged, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her hands. I debated whether to approach her, but something in her posture, the defeated slump of her shoulders, the way she kept checking her phone, made me curious. "Sarah?" She looked up, and I saw tears in her eyes.
Oh,
"Hello, Mrs. Vance. Are you all right, dear?" She laughed bitterly. "Am I all right? No, I'm not all right. My life is falling apart, and I don't even understand why. May I sit?" She nodded, and I settled into the chair across from her. Up close, I could see the strain around her eyes, the way her hands shook slightly as she reached for her coffee. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "It's Brandon. He's not the same person I fell in love with. He's paranoid, angry all the time. He thinks everyone is conspiring against him." "What makes him think that?" "Because they are." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I mean, I don't understand it, but something is definitely happening. His business is failing, his friends won't return his calls, and yesterday my father told me he was reconsidering his offer to bring Brandon into his firm." "Your father works in law, doesn't he?" "Corporate law. He was going to offer Brandon a position after we got married, but now—" She shrugged helplessly. "He says there are questions about Brandon's character that need to be resolved first." "What kind of questions?" "About how he treated you after Mr. Richard died. About whether he can be trusted with fiduciary responsibilities. About whether he has the ethical foundation necessary for legal practice." I felt a stab of something that might have been guilt. Sarah was innocent in all this, just a young woman who'd fallen in love with the wrong man. "Sarah, has Brandon told you what happened between us?" "He said you were trying to steal his inheritance, that you were using some legal technicality to take what rightfully belonged to him." "Is that all he said?" She looked uncomfortable. "Well, he also said you were bitter about not having children and that you were taking it out on him." The guilt evaporated instantly. Even now, even when his world was crumbling around him, Brandon was still spreading lies about me. "Sarah, would you like to know what really happened?" For the next 20 minutes, I told her everything. The dinner conversation, Brandon's exact words, his demand that I pack my bags and never come back. I told her about the will, about the respect clause, about how Richard had anticipated exactly this situation. By the time I finished, Sarah was crying openly. "I can't believe he said that to you. About not having children. That's—" She shook her head. "That's not the man I thought I was going to marry." "What will you do?" "I don't know. I love him, or I thought I did. But this Brandon, this angry, paranoid man who blames everyone else for his problems, I don't know who that is. Sometimes crisis reveals people's true character." She nodded miserably. "My father keeps asking me if I'm sure about the engagement. He says a man's character is revealed by how he treats people who can't fight back." "Your father sounds like a wise man."
he is. And he's worried about me.
She looked up, her eyes red but determined. "Mrs. Vance, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you behind what's happening to Brandon?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm a woman of faith, Sarah. I believe in justice and consequences. I believe that when someone does wrong, the community has a responsibility to respond." "But are you orchestrating this?" "I'm not orchestrating anything. I'm simply living my life and trusting that the truth will eventually come to light." "The truth about what?" "The truth about who Brandon really is. And the truth about what happens when someone chooses cruelty over kindness." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. He's been trying to get me to ask my father to intervene, to use his influence to help Brandon's business, to get him into the country club, to make the persecution stop. Will you? I don't know. I don't know if I can ask my father to compromise his principles for a man who... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Who threw his stepmother out of her home for the crime of not bearing children? Yes. She whispered the word like a confession. Sarah, you're a lovely young woman. You deserve someone who will treat you with respect, someone who will honor you even when times are difficult. The question you need to ask yourself is, if Brandon can treat me this way, how will he treat you when you're old or sick, or can't give him what he wants? She was quiet for a long time, staring at her untouched coffee. Finally, she looked up. What would you do if you were me? I would pray for wisdom. And I would remember that marriage is about choosing someone who will love you through the worst of times, not just the best. Even if it means being alone? Sarah, being alone is better than being with someone who doesn't respect you. Trust me on that. She nodded slowly, then gathered her purse. Thank you for being honest with me, Mrs. Vance. I have a lot to think about. As I watched her walk away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of me was satisfied that Brandon's world was continuing to crumble. But part of me genuinely felt sorry for Sarah, who was learning painful truths about the man she'd planned to marry. That evening, Janet called with an update that made my pulse quicken. Evelyn, Brandon's attorney, called again. This time, he's not asking for a meeting, he's begging for one. What's happened now? The State Ethics Commission officially opened an investigation into Vance Industries' billing practices. And get this, the IRS is conducting a routine audit of the company's tax returns for the past 3 years. Routine. Well, officially routine. But Margaret Sterling's husband mentioned that sometimes audits get triggered when concerned citizens report potential irregularities. What kind of irregularities? The kind that happen when you're cutting corners to maintain profit margins after losing major clients. Brandon's been scrambling to cover costs, and apparently, he's been creative with his accounting. Is he in real trouble? Not criminally, probably. But the scrutiny is making his remaining clients nervous. And investors don't like uncertainty. What does his lawyer want? Complete capitulation. He's proposing that Brandon formally apologize to you, acknowledge that he violated the will's respect clause, and accept whatever terms you're willing to offer. And if I refuse? Then Brandon loses everything. The business, the house, the trust fund. All of it goes to charity, and he gets nothing but a small monthly allowance. I was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. Janet, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think we've gone too far? What do you mean? I mean, is this justice or revenge? Because sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Janet was quiet for a long time. Evelyn, let me tell you something. Last week, I represented a woman whose husband died and left her with 3 young children. His business partner tried to steal the company by claiming she was incompetent to run it. You know what he told her? What? He told her that women don't belong in business, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps he was willing to give her, and that if she fought him, he'd make sure she never worked in this city again. What did you do? I called Margaret Sterling. Within 2 weeks, that man's business was bankrupt, his wife had filed for divorce, and he was working as a night security guard. Janet's voice was steady and sure. Was that justice or revenge? I don't know. Neither do I. But I know that woman is now successfully running her late husband's company, and her children have a secure future. Sometimes the distinction between justice and revenge doesn't matter as much as the outcome. What do you think I should do about Brandon? I think you should do what feels right to you. But remember, this isn't just about Brandon anymore. This is about every widow who's been mistreated, every woman who's been told she doesn't matter, every person who's been bullied by someone with power. You're saying I have a responsibility to see this through? I'm saying you have a responsibility to yourself. And to the woman you were before Brandon tried to make you feel worthless. That night, I knelt beside my bed and prayed for guidance. I prayed for wisdom, for discernment, for the strength to know the difference between justice and vengeance. But as I prayed, I kept hearing Brandon's voice. Pack your bags and never come back. You never gave him children anyway. And I knew that some wounds are too deep to heal with forgiveness alone. Sometimes, the only cure for cruelty is consequences. The network had shown me that I wasn't powerless, that I wasn't alone, that I mattered. And Brandon was about to learn that destroying a woman's dignity comes with a price that compounds daily. His world was closing in around him, and I was the center of the storm he'd created with his own hands. The meeting took place in Janet's conference room on a gray December morning. Brandon sat across from me, his lawyer beside him, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 3 months. His usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by the desperate demeanor of someone who'd finally realized he was in over his head. "Mrs. Vance," said his attorney, a nervous man named Robert Chin, no relation to Victoria, "my client would like to begin by offering you a sincere apology." I remained silent, watching Brandon's face. He looked like he was being forced to swallow poison. "Brandon." He cleared his throat. "Evelyn, I want to apologize for the things I said that night. I was grieving, and I said things I didn't mean." "What things specifically?" He flinched. "About you packing your bags. About you not having children. About you not belonging in the house." "And do you mean this apology?"
Yes.
"Of course." I leaned forward slightly. "Brandon, 3 weeks ago, you told your girlfriend that I was bitter about not having children and that I was taking it out on you. Last week, you told the Atlanta Business Journal that I was a greedy woman trying to steal your inheritance. This morning, you're apologizing. Which version is true?" His face flushed red. I was angry. I said things to other people that I shouldn't have said." "So you've been lying to everyone?" "I've been confused. Emotional." Janet slid a document across the table. "This is a complete transcript of the dinner conversation on November 15th. Mrs. Vance recorded it." Brandon and his attorney exchanged glances. I hadn't actually recorded anything, but the threat was enough to make Brandon's composure crack entirely. "Look, I said what I said, okay? I was an ass, and I'm sorry. But does that really justify destroying my entire life?" "Who's destroying your life?" "You are. You and your network of women. You're systematically destroying my business, my reputation, my relationships. All because of one bad conversation." "Brandon, I haven't done anything to you." "Bullshit." He leaned forward, his mask of contrition slipping. "You think I don't know what you're doing? The whisper campaigns, the social pressure, the mysterious concerns about my character? You're waging war on me. I'm a woman of faith, Brandon. I don't wage war. I pray for justice." "What's the difference?" I smiled coldly. "The difference is that I don't have to lift a finger. When you mistreat people, the community responds naturally. When you show poor character, people make their own decisions about whether to associate with you. That's not natural. That's coordinated. Is it? Or is it just that actions have consequences, and you're finally experiencing yours?" His attorney tried to regain control of the meeting. "Mrs. Vance, we're prepared to offer you a very generous settlement. You can keep the house, a significant portion of the investment portfolio, and we'll establish a trust that pays you a substantial monthly income for life." "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for dropping the will contest and calling off whatever campaign you're running against my client." Janet laughed. "Gentlemen, you don't seem to understand the situation. Mrs. Vance isn't running a campaign. She's simply living her life while her community responds to her stepson's behavior. Then maybe she could encourage her community to be more forgiving, suggested Robertson. Why would she do that? Because Brandon is facing complete financial ruin. The business is failing, his personal credit is destroyed, and he's about to lose everything. Everything he tried to steal from his stepmother, Janet pointed out. He made a mistake. He made a choice, I said quietly. He chose to treat me with cruelty and contempt. He chose to try to bully me into giving up my rights. He chose to spread lies about me to justify his actions. Those weren't mistakes, they were decisions. Brandon's composure finally shattered completely. Jesus Christ, Evelyn. I was upset. Dad had just died, and I was dealing with grief and stress. And yes, I said some terrible things. But I'm his son. I'm his flesh and blood. He wouldn't have wanted you to destroy me over a family argument. Your father loved you more than anything in the world, I said softly. But he also knew your character. That's why he put the respect clause in the will. What respect clause? Janet opened another folder. The clause that states that if you treat Mrs. Vance with anything less than complete respect, your inheritance is forfeit. That's impossible. Dad wouldn't have done that. Your father was a wise man. He hoped you'd grow up after his death, but he planned for the possibility that you wouldn't. You're lying. Show me the will. Janet slid the document across the table. Brandon read it quickly, his face growing paler with each line. This is insane. He's giving everything to charity if I don't kiss your ass. He's giving everything to charity if you don't treat me with respect. And who determines what constitutes respect? You. The community does. And they've made their judgment. Brandon stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. This is insane. You're destroying my life because your feelings got hurt. I'm not destroying anything, Brandon. I'm simply allowing the natural consequences of your actions to unfold. Natural consequences? There's nothing natural about this. You've turned the entire city against me. I've done nothing but tell the truth about what happened between us. If the city has turned against you, perhaps you should examine why. Because you're manipulating them. Am I? Or are they simply responding to the character you've shown them? He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before, genuine fear. Not of financial ruin or social isolation, but of the possibility that everything that was happening to him was his own fault. What do you want? He whispered. I want you to experience the consequences of your choices. I want you to understand what it feels like to be powerless and alone. I want you to learn that actions have meaning and that treating people with cruelty costs more than you can afford. And then what? After I've learned my lesson, then what? I stood up and gathered my purse. Then you live with the choices you've made. Just like I've had to live with the choice to love you as my own son for 20 years, only to have you throw me away like garbage the moment your father died. Evelyn, please. I'm begging you. You're begging me? The way you made me beg that night? The way you made me pack my bags and leave the only home I'd known for 2 decades. I was wrong. I admit it. I was completely wrong. Yes, you were. And now you're experiencing what it feels like to be on the receiving end of someone else's power. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Brandon, your father left you a choice. You could have treated me with respect and inherited everything. Instead, you chose cruelty. The will isn't punishment. It's just the natural result of your decision. It's not too late. I can change. Some things can't be unchanged, Brandon. Some words can't be unsaid. Some wounds can't be healed. I left him there, begging his lawyer to find some way to fix what couldn't be fixed. As I walked out of the building, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, complete and total peace. The network hadn't destroyed Brandon. His own character had done that. We'd simply created the conditions for his true nature to be revealed. And now everyone could see exactly who Richard Vance's son really was. Sarah returned the engagement ring on a snowy January evening. I wasn't there to witness it, but Janet heard about it from Patricia Whitmore, whose husband's construction company had been hired to install security systems in Sarah's father's law firm. Apparently, she walked into Brandon's office and placed the ring on his desk without saying a word. Janet told me over dinner. He begged her to reconsider, but she just looked at him and said, "I can't marry someone who would treat their stepmother that way." How did he react?
Badly.
He started ranting about how everyone was abandoning him, how he was being persecuted for one mistake. Sarah's father heard the commotion and came out of his office. What did he do? He told Brandon that the job offer was officially withdrawn and that he no longer wanted Brandon anywhere near his daughter or his business. I felt a stab of something that might have been pity. That must have been devastating. It was. But Evelyn, there's more. Margaret Sterling called me this morning. Her husband's been tracking Brandon's situation through his contacts at the courthouse. What did he find? Brandon's about to lose everything. The business is in bankruptcy, the house is going into foreclosure, and his personal debts are mounting. But more importantly, the IRS audit found enough irregularities to trigger a criminal investigation. Criminal? Tax evasion. Nothing that would send him to prison, probably, but enough to destroy any chance he has of rebuilding his reputation. Janet, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Did we push too hard? Did we go too far? Janet set down her wine glass and looked at me directly. Evelyn, let me tell you what happened to a woman I represented 5 years ago. Her husband died, and his business partner tried to force her to sell her share of the company for pennies on the dollar. When she refused, he started a rumor that she was mentally unstable, that grief had made her incompetent to make business decisions. What happened to her? She was committed to a psychiatric facility by her late husband's family. She lost the business, her home, and custody of her children. She spent 6 months in that facility before I could get her released. That's horrible. That's what happens when bullies face no consequences for their actions. They escalate. They find new victims. They get worse. But Brandon's not trying to have me committed. No, he's not. Because he learned very quickly that actions have consequences. Because he discovered that there are people in this world who will protect women like you. So you don't think we went too far? I think we went exactly as far as necessary. Brandon had a choice at every step of this process. He could have apologized sincerely and changed his behavior. He could have honored the will and treated you with respect. He could have accepted responsibility for his actions instead of blaming everyone else. But he didn't. No, he didn't. And that's not our fault. That's his. 3 days later, I received a call that I'd been both expecting and dreading. It was Brandon calling from a number I didn't recognize. Evelyn, please don't hang up. What do you want, Brandon? I want to meet with you. Just us.
No lawyers, no intermediaries.
I need to talk to you.
About what?
About everything. About what I've lost, about what I've learned, about what happens next. I don't think there's anything left to discuss.
Please.
I'm asking you, I'm begging you, to give me one more chance to make this right. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a small cafe downtown. When I arrived, I barely recognized the man sitting in the corner booth. Brandon had lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled, and his hair was uncombed. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. Thank you for coming, he said as I sat down. You look terrible. I feel terrible. I've lost everything, Evelyn. The business, the house, Sarah, my reputation. Everything. I'm sorry to hear that.
Are you?
Are you really? I considered the question carefully. I'm sorry that it came to this. I'm sorry that you made the choices you did. But I'm not sorry that actions have consequences. What I said to you that night, about packing your bags, about not having children, it was unforgivable. I know that now. Do you? I've had a lot of time to think about it, about how cruel those words were, about how much they must have hurt you, about how much Dad would have hated hearing me say them. Your father would have been devastated. I know. And I know that I can't take them back. I know that I can't undo what I did. Then what do you want from me? I want to know if there's any way back. Any way to earn your forgiveness, to rebuild what I've destroyed. Brandon, forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you receive. And right now, I'm not ready to give it. What would it take? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe it's just too late. But you're willing to destroy my entire life over one conversation? I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply allowing the natural consequences of your actions to unfold. Natural consequences? There's nothing natural about what's happening to me. Isn't there? You showed poor character, and people responded by questioning your character. You treated me with cruelty, and people decided they didn't want to associate with someone who treats widows that way. You lied about me to justify your actions, and people decided they couldn't trust you. But everyone makes mistakes. Not everyone makes the same mistake you did. Not everyone chooses cruelty over kindness. Not everyone decides to destroy someone they claim to love. I never meant to destroy you. Then what did you mean to do? I meant to claim what was mine, to secure my inheritance, to make sure I wasn't cheated out of what Dad intended for me. And what about what your father intended for me?
I didn't think about that.
No, you didn't. You didn't think about me at all. You thought about yourself, your needs, your desires. You treated me like an obstacle to be removed, not like a person with rights and feelings. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking clearly. Grief doesn't excuse cruelty, Brandon. It might explain it, but it doesn't excuse it. So, there's no way back? No path to redemption. There's always a path to redemption, but it doesn't lead through me. What do you mean? I mean that your redemption isn't my responsibility. You need to find your own way to become a better person, to learn from your mistakes, to grow from this experience. And you? What happens to you? I continue living my life. I honor your father's memory. I use the resources he left me to do good in the world. Without me. Without you. Brandon was quiet for a long time, staring at his untouched coffee. Finally, he looked up. I used to think you were weak. Quiet, submissive, easy to push around. I know you did. I was wrong. You're not weak at all. He struggled for the words. You're terrifying. I'm not terrifying. I'm just tired of being treated like I don't matter. You matter. You've proven that you matter. Yes, I have. And I'm paying the price for thinking you didn't. Yes, you are. He stood up slowly, like an old man. Evelyn, I want you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did, and I understand why it was wrong. And I understand that understanding doesn't fix anything. It's a start. A start toward what? Toward becoming the man your father hoped you could be. Even if it's too late for us? Especially if it's too late for us. I watched him walk away, stooped and broken, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel, a kind of peace. Not satisfaction, not triumph, but peace. The kind of peace that comes when justice has been served and the universe has been balanced. Brandon had learned that actions have consequences. He'd learned that treating people with cruelty costs more than he could afford. He'd learned that power isn't just about money or position. It's about relationships and respect and the community's willingness to support you. Most importantly, he'd learned that some lessons can only be taught through complete defeat. The final reading of Richard's will take place on a cold February morning, exactly 6 months after his death. The law offices of Morrison, Patterson and Associates were filled with representatives from various charities, all waiting to learn how much of Brandon's forfeited inheritance they would receive. Brandon wasn't there. According to Janet, He'd left Atlanta entirely, taking a job with a small construction company in Alabama. Word was that he was living in a studio apartment and driving a 10-year-old pickup truck, a far cry from the mansion and luxury cars he'd once taken for granted. "Ladies and gentlemen," Janet announced to the assembled group, "according to the terms of Richard Vance's will, his son Brandon has forfeited his inheritance due to violations of the Respect Clause. The business assets will be sold, and the proceeds will be distributed according to Mr. Vance's wishes." She began reading the list of beneficiaries: the children's hospital where Richard had volunteered, the literacy program he'd supported, the scholarship fund he'd established for underprivileged students. Each organization would receive enough money to fund their programs for years to come. "And finally," Janet continued, "the remainder of the estate, including the family home and all personal assets, goes to Evelyn Vance, with the understanding that she will serve as the executor of Richard's charitable legacy." After the meeting, I found myself standing alone in the conference room, staring out at the city where I'd spent the last 6 months rebuilding my life. The network had become more than just a support system, it had become a family. Margaret Sterling had introduced me to boards of directors who needed experienced volunteers. Victoria Chun had helped me establish my own investment portfolio. Patricia Whitmore had become one of my closest friends. "You did it," Janet said, joining me at the window. "Did what?" "You survived. You fought back. You won." Did I win? Or did I just endure? Does it matter? I considered the question. I suppose not. The result is the same either way. "And how do you feel about that result?" "Tired," I admitted. "Satisfied, but tired." "What will you do now?" "I'm going to honor Richard's memory. I'm going to use the resources he left me to do good in the world. I'm going to be the woman he believed I could be." "And Brandon?" "Brandon is learning to be the man his father hoped he could become. It's just taking him longer than anyone expected." Janet smiled. "You know, when this all started, I thought it was about money, about inheritance and legal rights. What do you think it was about?" "Respect.
Dignity.
The right to be treated like a human being instead of an inconvenience." "And did we achieve that?" "Look around you, Evelyn. Look at what you've built in 6 months. The relationships, the influence, the respect of this entire community. You're not just a woman who survived her stepson's cruelty. You're a woman who transformed that cruelty into something powerful. The network. The network was already there. You just reminded us why it was necessary." That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. I hadn't visited his grave since the funeral, but somehow it felt like the right time. The headstone was simple black granite with his name, dates, and a single inscription: "Beloved husband and father." I placed a bouquet of his favorite flowers, white roses, on the grave and knelt beside it. "I did it, Richard," I whispered. "I stood up for myself. I showed Brandon that actions have consequences. I protected the legacy you built." The wind stirred the trees overhead, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice. "I'm proud of you, Evelyn. I always knew you were stronger than you realized." "I miss you," I continued. "I miss your laugh, your terrible jokes, your way of making everything seem possible. But I want you to know that I'm all right. I'm more than all right. I'm free. Free from the fear of being abandoned. Free from the need to make myself smaller to avoid conflict. Free from the belief that I didn't deserve respect and dignity." "Brandon is learning," I said. "It's hard for him, but he's learning. Maybe someday he'll understand what you were trying to teach him through the will. Maybe someday he'll become the man you hoped he could be. And if he doesn't, then that's his choice. I can't save him from himself, Richard. I can only save myself." As I stood to leave, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine peace. Not the satisfaction of victory, not the relief of survival, but the deep, abiding peace that comes from knowing you've acted with integrity. The network had taught me that I wasn't alone, that there were people who would stand with me when I needed them. But more importantly, it had taught me that I didn't need to be rescued. I needed to be reminded of my own strength. Brandon had tried to make me disappear, to erase me from the life I'd built with his father. Instead, he'd revealed the power I'd always possessed but never fully understood. Some lessons can only be learned through complete defeat. And sometimes, the person who needs to learn that lesson isn't your enemy, it's yourself. 2 years later, I was hosting a charity luncheon at the house, my house now, when Kelly, my former receptionist from Vance Industries, approached me with a nervous smile. "Mrs. Vance, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I heard that Mr. Brandon is back in town." I set down my wine glass and turned to face her fully. "Is he?" "My cousin works at Morrison Construction, the same company that canceled their contract with Vance Industries. Apparently, he applied for a job there. A supervisor position." "Did he get it?" Kelly shook her head. "Patricia Whitmore's husband personally reviewed the application. He said Brandon was qualified, but that there were still character concerns that needed to be addressed." "I see. Mrs. Vance, can I ask you something?" "Of course." Is the network still watching him?" I smiled at the question. Over the past 2 years, the network had become something of a legend in Atlanta's social circles. Not because we advertised our activities, but because word had spread about what happened when someone mistreated a widow in our community. "Kelly, the network doesn't watch anyone. We simply pay attention to character, and we make sure that character has consequences." "But it's been 2 years. Don't you think he's learned his lesson?" I considered the question. Perhaps. But learning a lesson and proving you've changed are 2 different things. What would it take for him to prove he's changed? I don't know. That's not for me to decide. That evening, I was reading in my study when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, I found Brandon standing on my front porch. He looked different, older, worn down by hard work and harder lessons, but somehow more solid than the entitled young man who'd thrown me out of this house 2 years earlier. "Hello, Evelyn." "Brandon, I heard you were back in town. May I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course." He walked into the foyer and looked around at the house he'd once considered his birthright. I'd redecorated since taking possession, making it more my own, but the essential character of the place remained the same. "It looks good," he said simply. "Thank you. Can I offer you something to drink?" "Just water, please." I led him to the living room and poured 2 glasses of water from the crystal pitcher on the side table. He sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped tightly together. "I came to apologize," he said without preamble. "You already apologized, Brandon." "Several times." "No. I asked for forgiveness. I begged for mercy. I tried to negotiate my way out of consequences." He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Genuine humility. "I never actually apologize. What's the difference?" An apology doesn't ask for anything in return. It just acknowledges the harm that was done and takes responsibility for it. And that's what you're doing now. "I'm trying to." He took a shaky breath. "Evelyn, what I said to you that night, about packing your bags, about not having children, about not belonging here, it was cruel and unforgivable. I said those things because I wanted to hurt you, because I thought hurting you would make me feel more powerful." Did it? For about 5 minutes. Then I realized that I'd just revealed myself to be exactly the kind of person Dad was worried I might become. And what kind of person is that? A bully. A coward. Someone who would rather tear others down than build himself up. I sipped my water and studied his face. What changed? Losing everything. Having to work construction jobs for minimum wage. Living in a studio apartment with no air conditioning. watching other people look at me the way I used to look at people I thought were beneath me. That must have been difficult. It was humbling, which is what I needed. He leaned forward slightly. Evelyn, I want you to know that I understand now what you did. What the network did. It wasn't persecution, it was education. Education. You taught me that actions have consequences. That treating people with cruelty costs more than I could afford. That respect isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn. And have you earned it? I don't know. I'm trying to. I volunteer at a homeless shelter now. I'm working with a literacy program teaching construction skills to people who are trying to get back on their feet. I'm trying to become the kind of person who builds things up instead of tearing them down. That's good to hear. But I didn't come here to tell you about my rehabilitation. I came here to tell you that I'm sorry. Genuinely, completely sorry for what I did to you. And to tell you that I understand why you did what you did. Do you? You showed me that I wasn't untouchable, that there were people in this world who would protect women like you from men like me. You showed me that cruelty has a price, and that price compounds daily until it becomes unbearable. And how do you feel about that? Grateful. The word surprised me. Grateful? Grateful that you cared enough to teach me. Grateful that you didn't let me continue being the person I was becoming. Grateful that you gave me the chance to become someone better. I didn't give you anything, Brandon. You chose to become someone better. I chose to stop being someone worse. There's a difference. We sat in silence for a moment, and I found myself looking at this man who'd once been my stepson, trying to see the boy I'd helped raise. He was still there, underneath the humility and hard-won wisdom, but he was different now. Quieter. More serious. More real. What will you do now? I asked. I'm going to keep working. Keep volunteering. Keep trying to earn back the respect I threw away. I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I'm not asking for help. I'm just asking for the chance to prove that I've learned from my mistakes. And if the network continues to watch you, then I'll make sure they see someone worth watching. Someone who treats people with dignity and respect. Someone who builds instead of destroys. That's a good plan. It's the only plan. He stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, where a photo of Richard still held the place of honor. Dad would have hated the man I became that night. Yes, he would have. But I think he would have been proud of the man I'm trying to become now. I think so too. Evelyn, may I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? I considered the question. I'm at peace. I'm useful.
I'm respected.
I'm surrounded by people who care about me. I think that's better than happy. Good. You deserve that. So do you, Brandon. You deserve the chance to become the man your father hoped you could be. Even after what I did, especially after what you did, the hardest lessons teach the most important truths. He nodded and moved toward the door. I'll go now. Thank you for listening to me. Brandon. He turned back. Your fathers will have a provision I never told you about. What kind of provision? If you ever demonstrated genuine remorse and character change, you would be eligible for a small inheritance. Not the business, not the house, but enough to help you rebuild your life. His eyes widened. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because it had to be genuine. It had to come from you, not from the promise of money. And do you think it's genuine now? I think you're trying to become someone who deserves it. Whether you succeed is up to you. What would I have to do? Continue being the person you're becoming. Continue volunteering, continue working, continue treating people with respect. In 5 years, if you've maintained that path, we can discuss it. 5 years. Redemption isn't a sprint, Brandon. It's a marathon. And you've got a lot of ground to make up. He nodded slowly. 5 years. I can do that. I hope so. Evelyn. Yes. Thank you. For everything. For teaching me what I needed to learn. even when it hurt, for giving me the chance to become someone better, for not giving up on me entirely. You're welcome. After he left, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 2 years ago, I had been a grieving widow, thrown out of her home by a cruel stepson. Tonight, I was a woman who had rebuilt her life, claimed her power, and helped transform someone else's character in the process. The network had taught me that I wasn't alone, that there were people who would stand with me when I needed them. But more importantly, it had taught me that I had the power to create consequences for those who chose cruelty over kindness. Brandon's transformation wasn't my victory, it was his. But watching him take responsibility for his actions, seeing him genuinely commit to becoming a better person, felt like the completion of something that had begun with his father's death. Richard had been a wise man. He'd known his son's character, and he'd structured his will to create the possibility of redemption. Not guaranteed redemption. Brandon had to earn that himself, but the opportunity to learn from his mistakes and grow from them. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Janet. Evelyn, I just heard that Brandon was seen leaving your house. Everything all right? Everything's fine. He came to apologize. Genuinely. I think so. Time will tell. And how do you feel about that? Oddly proud of him. It took courage to come here, to face me after everything that's happened. Are you going to tell the network? I'm going to tell them that Brandon is trying to change and that we should give him the space to prove himself. But I'm also going to tell them to keep watching. Because people can change, but change takes time to prove itself. And because our job isn't just to punish bad behavior, it's to protect women from men who haven't learned better yet. And if he backslides, then he'll face the same consequences he faced before. The network doesn't disappear just because someone says they're sorry. Good. I'd hate to think we went through all this just to have him return to his old ways. After I hung up, I walked through the house that had become truly mine, not through marriage or inheritance, but through my own strength and the support of women who understood what it meant to be underestimated and mistreated. In the study, I sat down at Richard's desk, my desk now, and opened the leather-bound journal where I'd been recording my thoughts throughout this entire experience. Tonight's entry would be different from the others. February 15th, I wrote, Brandon came to apologize tonight, not to ask for forgiveness or mercy, but to take responsibility for his actions and acknowledge the harm he caused. He seems genuinely committed to becoming a better person, though time will tell if that commitment lasts. I think Richard would be proud of how this turned out. Not because Brandon was punished, punishment was never the goal, but because Brandon was educated. He learned that actions have consequences, that treating people with cruelty costs more than he could afford, and that respect is something you earn through your choices every single day. The network served its purpose. We protected a widow from mistreatment. We demonstrated that the community will respond to character failures, and we created the conditions for genuine change. More importantly, we proved that women don't have to accept cruelty in silence. I am not the same woman who was thrown out of this house 2 years ago. I am stronger, more confident, more connected to a community of people who share my values. I have learned to use my voice, to claim my power, and to trust in the justice that comes when good people work together. Brandon was right about one thing. This was divine justice. Not because God reached down from heaven to punish him, but because God worked through his people to create consequences for cruelty and opportunities for redemption. Some battles are fought on a spiritual plane, with determined women as earthly vessels. We fought with prayer and community, with truth and consequences, with a quiet strength that comes from knowing you're on the right side of justice. Brandon thought he was untouchable. He learned that some battles can't be won through intimidation or entitlement. He learned that there are networks of power he never knew existed, wielded by women he'd underestimated his entire life. Most importantly, he learned that actions have meaning, that treating people with dignity matters, that respect is the foundation of all healthy relationships. I don't know what the future holds for Brandon. I hope he continues on the path he's chosen, that he becomes the man his father hoped he could be. But if he doesn't, if he returns to his old ways, he'll discover that the network never forgets and never stops watching. As for me, I will continue to honor Richard's memory by living fully, by using the resources he left me to do good in the world, and by ensuring that other women never have to face what I faced alone. The network taught me that I was never powerless. I just didn't know where my power came from. It comes from community, from shared values, from the collective strength of people who refuse to let cruelty go unchallenged. Tonight, for the first time since Richard died, I feel truly at peace. Not because I won some battle against Brandon, but because I discovered who I really am when I stop accepting less than I deserve. I am Evelyn Vance. I am a woman of faith, strength, and dignity. I am surrounded by people who love and respect me. I am exactly where I belong. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. I closed the journal and looked around the study that had witnessed so much of this journey. Tomorrow, I would meet with the charity board to discuss expanding our literacy program. Next week, I would host a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. Next month, I would travel to New York to speak at a conference about supporting widows and elderly women. I had built a life worth living, surrounded by people worth knowing, engaged in work worth doing. I had transformed pain into purpose, isolation into community, powerlessness into strength. Brandon's cruelty had been intended to destroy me. Instead, it had revealed the woman I was always meant to become. Sometimes, divine justice works in mysterious ways. Sometimes, the punishment becomes the blessing, the wound becomes the wisdom, and the ending becomes the beginning. I was not the same woman who had been discarded like garbage 2 years ago. I was something much more powerful. I was a woman who had claimed her place in the world and refused to be moved from it. And that transformation, that claiming of power and dignity and respect, was worth every moment of pain it had taken to achieve. The network had taught me that I was never alone. But more importantly, I had learned that I was never powerless. I just needed to remember where true power comes from. It comes from truth. It comes from community. It comes from the unwavering belief that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And it comes from the understanding that sometimes the most profound act of faith is refusing to accept anything less than what you're worth. Brandon had tried to make me disappear. Instead, he had helped me become exactly who I was always meant to be. And for that, in a strange way, I would always be grateful. 5 years later, a letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by hand to my office at the charity foundation I now run. Inside was a simple note from Brandon, along with newspaper clippings documenting his work with homeless veterans, photographs from the literacy center he'd helped establish, and a letter of recommendation from the pastor of the church where he'd been volunteering. Evelyn, the note read, I wanted you to know that I've kept my promise. 5 years of trying to become someone worthy of respect, someone who builds instead of destroys. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that the lesson you taught me took root. I called Janet that afternoon. It's time, I said simply. Are you sure? I'm sure. He's earned it. The inheritance wasn't large, enough to help him start a small business, maybe buy a modest house. But it was Richard's final gift to his son, the reward for choosing growth over bitterness, service over selfishness, humility over entitlement. Some stories end with revenge. This one ended with redemption, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Divine justice, I had learned, isn't about punishment. It's about transformation. And sometimes, the greatest victory is helping your enemy become someone you can finally respect.
Wow.
What a journey we just took together. Evelyn's story reminds us that we are never powerless, never alone, and never without options when we stand together as a community of strong women. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own inner strength, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our growing family. Share this video with a woman who needs to hear Evelyn's message, whether she's facing her own challenges or just needs a reminder of what she's capable of. Drop a comment below and let me know what part of Evelyn's journey resonated most with you. Remember, you are powerful, you are worthy of respect, and you are never alone. Until next time, keep shining your light and supporting your sisters.